Another year of YSI Money View. I was, as I mentioned yesterday, I was very excited to be part of this discussion last year. And for me, one of the outcomes of a couple of days of conversations with you folks was that it helped push me over the edge and get started on this project, which came to be called Soon Parted, newsletter, blog on Substack, which I've built up over the last year, and many of you, of course, are enthusiastic. You're my core audience, enthusiastic readers and commenters. So I thank you I thank the YSI community, the Money View Symposium community for helping create the context in which I came to understand that there were people listening, and for all of you who've been with me over the last year in conversation. So far, we've just heard some really deep and thoughtful papers on the Chinese financial system, an interest of mine for some time, but what is very quickly clear is that there is way too much for any one person. And in trying to write a newsletter twice a week for a year now, it is painfully obvious that there is no way to do it all. So that means it's the work for a community, and we have to share expertise, and not everybody can be experts on everything, but we might all like to know a little bit about everything. So events like this are critical. I'm happy to be able to provide one connecting thread, which brings many of these conversations together, and that's what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about today. This is Soon Parted. I'm going to tell you about something about the experience of writing this, and maybe what it shows, things that you might not be able to see just by reading it. I'll say a little bit about some of the content, but I think there are many places where you can hear about the ideas that we're talking about, and I'll respond to any questions about the subject matter, of course. But I want to share with you here a little bit about how it has come to be what it is, and a little bit about what that means for my intellectual work and where it plugs in. And then I want to also, as part of that, offer 3 provocations for ways that this work could be carried forward. It's too much for one person, but in doing this, I see some places where I know that we're missing things. We, the Money View community, don't have the tools or the depth or the language to say certain things that we probably need to be able to talk about. So I'll try to point out what I think those things are, and maybe they can be an input to other ideas that come out of this work, so that we can, over the course of the next year, move things a little bit farther, broaden the conversation, and build out this picture a little bit more. So let me get into it. These are the themes. I created these themes just by looking at my last the things I've written for Soon Parted since the beginning of the year, and it turns out to be a pretty representative list of themes. So I'm going to use this structure to talk about the newsletter, and talk about where it fits into the community. So that's a little preview. In addition to the YSI Symposium last year, one of the motivating circumstances for this work was the publication of my book on Minsky, which came out in late 2019, and so it had not been out for very long before the COVID-19 pandemic, started to move through every aspect of everybody's lives. And so in a way, the book, it just didn't seem like the thing that needed to be talked about in 2020, which was unfortunate for that. But you know, we had other things to think about. By 2021, I had a semester of sabbatical and was looking for ways to keep conversations going about the book. And I had written it in such a way that it was, I thought, not too tightly tied to any particular current events. So that meant the book is still valuable, and it wasn't an urgent thing with a short shelf life. But I also wanted to be able to keep writing in a way that built on the book, but which followed current events a little bit more. Maybe a way to keep Minsky engaged in the conversation without just repeating things that were in the book. And so the newsletter the newsletter provided a good way to do that. And these days I bring up Minsky every once in a while, but I don't feel like I need to talk about Minsky in every single post. Here's a nice picture of Minsky. This picture was taken by Diana Minsky, who was very supportive. You see this picture around, it's easy to find, but she was very supportive in the book process. On Minsky, I just want to say one thing which comes out of, which is, I didn't get to formulate this yesterday during Perry's conversation with Anastasia, and then I had to go before that liquidity happy hour. So I went into my soon parted system and I made this. The question I thought, try to get my understanding of this in the simplest way possible. Of course, it's a long story, as Perry told us yesterday, and I know the Minsky story pretty well. I don't know the Kindleberger story all that well. But the question was, we know that Kindleberger and Minsky crossed paths in 1981. They had Minsky came to Kindleberger's conference and they put together this volume. Minsky had a paper in the volume. Kindleberger edited it. As Perry said, it is a very clear and carefully put together statement of Minsky's financial instability hypothesis, clearer than he usually is. And we can probably correctly attribute that to Kindleberger's influence. And we know that after that, Kindleberger had a nice photo of himself with Minsky's book clearly visible in it. So the question was, we know they crossed paths in the early 1980s, around 1981. How did it affect the thought of the two of them? And the way I put it was like this: before 1981, before this interaction, Kindleberger had started from international money. So he already had a sense of the survival constraint from the balance of payments. And he already had a sense of the dealer model from thinking about international, from key currencies, from a global monetary system. And he had his own sense of financial instability, clearly that he had that independently, working on, that work that we see in, for example, in Manias, Panics, and Crashes. So after their collaboration, Kindleberger didn't lose anything, clearly. But what we know that he gained was that he liked Minsky's theory well enough to call it the Kindleberger-Minsky theory, which Minsky didn't do. And we can see the intellectual connection there. What about for Minsky? Well, Minsky had the survival constraint from the very beginning, and that gave him a sense of financial instability. But as Perry said yesterday, he had never really gotten into international money, and for that reason, possibly, or maybe it was just he just never quite noticed it. He never had a sense of the dealer model, and this is for us who study money this way. The fact that Minsky didn't have a clear sense of price making through securities dealing is a big issue, and the thing that would have helped him the most. So how did they come out of this? How did Minsky come out of this collaboration? Well, as Anastasia pointed out, Minsky in his later years developed an interest in international money, and he figured out that the survival constraint mapped onto the balance of payments, but he didn't pick up the dealer model from this interaction with Kindleberger, and it would have been nice if he had, because then Minsky's work on international money would have been a little more coherent. As it was, he dabbled in it, but didn't really say anything useful. You could see what he was trying to do, and we can probably say pretty certainly that he would have gotten there if he had a dealer model in mind. So, and I point out that Minsky sat in a money market brokerage house very early in his career, and so he was watching people make markets in federal funds, and he wrote it up in a nice paper very, very early on, QJE 1957. So he would have been in a good position to have a dealer model. He could have seen it then, because that's almost certainly what was going on around him. But he didn't. He saw other things there, which were also interesting, but left him without a great sense of how markets were made. So I say, in the end, it looks like Kindleberger gets a bit further on this, but we don't have to choose. We can enjoy them together. So that is the comment I wanted to make after yesterday's conversation. And I thank Perry and Anastasia for those comments. And of course, we also heard Tom and Zoltan, who added quite a lot to that conversation. But I did get to talk to Zoltan. So I'll leave that aside for now. A big theme that has come out over a year of soon parted. Needing a steady stream of topics, I watch the news a lot, as is obvious if you read it, and so we've been following crypto and this conversation around central bank digital currencies. Over the last few weeks, I've tried to build out an understanding of wholesale crypto, and I'm not even totally sure what the questions are here. So with each post, I'm trying to say, kind of identify one idea and say it in 600 to 1,000 words and maybe a picture or two. We're going to talk about this a lot tomorrow, so I don't want to say too much about these ideas now, but I'm looking forward tomorrow to speaking with Isabella Kaminska, who's also done some very important work through the Financial Times until recently on these questions. And I think we have a similar approach. So there's a lot more to say about this, and I want to say it, but I want to say it tomorrow. Let me just right now, I'll just point out that, this was a process, really. It has taken months, and many of you have been along for the ride, but it's taken months and many different observation points to try to figure out how to make sense of this crypto, CBDC, tokenization, blockchain conversation in terms of the money view. A key moment, which is what this picture shows, a key moment was in the Poly Network heist, as I described it. Poly Network is a DeFi, decentralized finance project. It sets up what we know is a dealing system, but interestingly, it's across different blockchains. And so as part of trying to figure out why they lost $600 million, or why they had $600 million sitting in a place where it could be stolen by a hacker, I was trying to sort of make sense of that in a way that went, deeper than the Financial Times was willing to go. And out of that, I was teaching international finance at the same time, and out of that came a recognition that each blockchain is very comparable to a currency area, not associated with a nation state, but associated instead with an algorithmic structure, with a blockchain structure that defines a payment area, and on which, under current designs, there are basically no liabilities, or there are no endpoint. There are no liabilities at the endpoints. So they're building a set of asset only payment areas. And once you can describe it that way, it's much easier to start to see past some of the language that obfuscates the financial relations, and to see past the hype that has got people maybe excited about the wrong things or what have you. But there were, Poly Network was a big moment in figuring this out for me. But there have been a number of, this conversation is pretty active. And so over the course of the last year, there have been a number of points where this has come up. So I think we'll follow this further tomorrow with Isabella. But it does lead me to what I figured out so far has led me to a question for this community, which I tried to formulate here. It does seem to me like we need to think about how we have a conversation with folks from computer science. Possibly some of this conversation, I don't know everything that's going on, so maybe it's just that this is happening and I don't know about it, which would be great news. But the question I have is, there's a lot of smart people working on crypto and DeFi, and they're going to lose a lot of money pretty soon. So when they do that, some of them will go back to some other jobs, but some of them will have found their way into wondering what is really going on with the financial system. And when they lose their shirts, some of them might say, wow, I didn't understand that. I wonder if I could. And I think it would be good for us to welcome those who are curious and willing to learn into this conversation. They know some things that I don't think we know, or at least that I don't know. What we're seeing with crypto and DeFi in particular is that these people write from a tech point of view. Now it's a limitation for them because it leads them to make things up from scratch that already exist, and it's going to lead them to rediscover, liquidity, for example, to their detriment. So it's not an unmitigated good, but some of these ideas are going to get built into the wholesale monetary system, as we're seeing. I've written recently about what Citibank is doing, about what JPM is doing. We'll see where the Fed plugs into that. But I think we're going to need to be able to talk about ideas like tokenization, about distributed ledgers. And there's some surface level technological questions and some deep computer science theory with a fair amount of math in there. And I think it will be better to have a constructive conversation going on those issues. So I wonder if that's happening somewhere, and I don't know about it, maybe, or if not, I wonder if we could think about how to start that conversation or cultivate that conversation in conversation with all of the work that is already going on under a Money View heading, because we know that we're well positioned to understand financial relationships. So we're flexible enough that when things change, we can change too. We're not stuck. We're not attached to an unchanging conceptual framework. We have a flexible conceptual framework that we change when we need to. So I'd like to see where we can take that conversation. Another big set of themes that has been important to build out has been what I call here Money View apparatus. And I feel like in the newsletter world, I can't hit this theme too many times in a row before I start losing people's attention. But I have tried to occasionally build out a couple of sort of infrastructural reference points for us. For me, the challenge is trying to say something in 600 words, 800 words, because that's the implicit contract that I have with my audience. And so it means really trying to cut away as much of the fat as I can and just say one thing. I'm interested, of course, in the details, but I've given myself a space to write that where they don't all fit. So I'm trying to really distill some of these ideas in a way that I can write about them in a short space. And there does seem to be an audience for that, which I'm grateful for. And I think it is helping our broader conversation. At the same time, I'm only doing one piece of the work, and I'm relying on others to do the detailed work and locate the problems that are still lurking in the details. There are a few of these, and I was very pleased with how my most recent post, which came out yesterday, on I had this idea about crypto and the survival constraint had been on my mind for a while. I've talked about it in other contexts where I think with other people, and so the thing about Soon Parted is that I really care about it a lot. And so I feel that deadline very strongly, and it pushed me to actually sit there for 2.5 hours, and really write that idea out and find all the words, at least enough that I could get close to putting that idea in a form where people could see it. It's never perfect, and I come back and I take up ideas again and rework them, but the deadline is very motivating for me, and I each post gets a lot of constructive feedback and emails. Possibly soon, too many emails for me to respond to all of them. Possibly too many for me to respond to everything soon, but the deadline keeps me focused on that, and has led to a lot of work. One Money View apparatus kind of idea that I've been building out is this one. I won't walk you through this. This is, you might have seen this a couple of weeks ago. I was trying to think about how we can talk more about macro in a recognizably Money View sort of language. And in particular, I've been teaching intro to macro and 200 level macro. I've been teaching that class a lot this year. And to keep myself interested in the teaching, I've been, obviously trying to find ways to connect it to the other things that I work on. So Hawtrey is a reference point for many of us. And of course, I learned about Hawtrey from Perry. This is adapted from the beginning of Currency and Credit, not the Art of Central Banking, which many of us have also read. But this is similar perspective written earlier, Currency and Credit. And so it's sources and uses accounting, so flows. And just it's a question of where credit expansion fits into the production system, and a macroeconomic kind of approach, but not based on a national income accounting framework, but instead kind of a supply chain framework. So it also resonates with Hicks's market theory of money, the concept, I'll call it a model. It's written only in words, that he builds up in the first few chapters of that book. So I've been working on this a lot in part. Sometimes it shows up in Soon Parted, but also it shows up in my teaching of macro. So I've done a lot of work on this, and I have a lot of rough notes. You can kind of see it if you read Soon Parted, but the question or thought, which I'll put out for others to think together with me about, is I think probably a lot of us will end up teaching macro one day or another, because there are lots more macro classes than there are money and banking classes. It's a good job. You can get a job teaching macro. It's not a terrible thing. But if you're in that situation, then what are you going to do? I've been fortunate to have a lot of control. Nobody tells me. They tell me that I have to teach macro, but they don't tell me what macro I have to teach. So I've used Soon Parted as an opportunity to develop a language for teaching macro that works for me, and where I don't feel like it's a waste of time. I wonder if we could work together to figure out what I'm picturing as, the most polished version would eventually be a small book, 40,000 words or something, where you could follow the big ideas of macro, but built up using a sources and uses framework. And it would work on its own if someone wanted to try to map out macro using only accounting relationships, and sort of get to big ideas about supply chains, and big ideas about, you can do a Minsky, you can do hedge speculative Ponzi in T accounts. So there's a lot of things you could get to. You could also get to a NEPA framework, national income accounts framework, and you can get to a stock flow consistent modeling type of accounting framework. So there's really a ton of things you could say. It might be interesting for us, if there are others teaching macro, to start sharing some resources on that, and economize on the effort, and maybe even we would find that there are some interesting, I don't need to go to a macro conference necessarily, but we might find that there's some interesting progress at the edge between monetary and macro that we would be in a position to contribute to, especially since the pandemic has given us these supply chain issues, which don't show up in national accounts, and that's turning out to be quite consequential when you think about what the Fed has to react to that. And they have no choice but to react because of their mandate, but they don't have a good theory, and they don't have good monetary policy instruments to respond to the issues. So instead, they're using a blunt instrument to respond to a complicated problem. So we can't fix that. We're not going to be done in time for that. But I wonder if there might be interest among this community in talking about how to think about macro within the money view framework in a way that could be constructive and make whatever time we spend teaching macro also a little more constructive. All right. So of course I'm leaving many things behind. So, but I also want to leave time for questions. So you choose if you have questions, just let me know, and I'll come back to things that I'm going quickly through now. Another big theme these days is the following the Fed, following QT, trying to keep up with Zoltan is almost a full-time job by itself. I don't really try to do that. I can't. My policy is not to read Zoltan on the same day that it comes out. that he puts stuff out because someone else is going to be faster and I don't want to compete on speed. So I wait. I usually respond to the Fed when the minutes come out, not when the statement comes out. So I'm just not, I'm trying not to be in the instantaneous quick takes game. But what it means is that I have time to actually read the minutes, not as a source of ultimate truth. You know, the Fed has a complicated job and they have imperfect understanding and they don't have all the details and their theories might be wrong. So I'm not reading it as a source of truth, but I'm reading it as an important reference point and a consequential institution and a window into a certain decision-making process, which may or may not be right in the end. And I'm not sure that I know what's right, but I am sure that they are not sure that they're right. So so I have the money view to help make sense of that. The way I got into this, this is a new version of an old picture, which showed up in Perry's book and which many of you have encountered. When I started working on this, I realized that I needed to be able to produce one or two or three, no more than three visuals for each post. And I wanted to be able to put up balance sheet graphs and T accounts and have an audience that would always be willing to see another set of T accounts on which I have been stunningly successful. One place to start was in rebuilding things that I already had. So this graph I had worked on with Perry at the time in the early 2010s. I rebuilt this in R and I did it in such a way that it's much more flexible. Now I know a lot more R than I did back then. And so it's much more flexible. And so when I started to figure out the pandemic, it was very natural to make this graph, which I use all the time, which updates itself automatically. And so I have this nice picture about which 1,000 stories can be told. And I have told a few. But I guess you folks know how this works and you know many of these stories. The thing I would say here is that I built this based on what I already knew how to do. I had something that had worked in the past. I wasn't certain that it would work again, but I certainly knew that it was a good place to start. And the twice a week schedule has forced me to take one small step at a time, going from what I am sure of to what I think might be true, better than a guess, but not a certainty. Take one step forward at a time, and then try to write again. So it's been a lot of that has been building on an apparatus that already was working, and I've expanded it a lot in the last year to be able to make pictures like this. And this picture easily, just looking at it, turns into a paragraph pretty easily. It turns into 3 paragraphs without too much difficulty. So it's all motivated or it's all designed to keep me focused on writing and connecting with people on the ideas. I have dug into new sources of data as well, and this graph is, these are all overnight interest rates. The data comes directly from it comes from the Office of Financial Research, and they get it from the New York Fed. And this was just, for me, this was like, okay, here's a data source. I can spend 2 hours getting this data into R and turning it into a graph. And then by the time that was done, the question, I had this graph and it looked pretty nice. And then, can I make a story out of this? Well, in fact, I do have the intellectual apparatus to make a story out of this. And I did it once quick, and then I did it again. And then I've done it several times since then. So I kind of created a necessity, and then found an easy step, which was to grab this data from the OFR and build it into a graph. And then over time, things add up. This graph is I find this deeply satisfying. It's this, on the top is the same graph. On the bottom are entries from the Fed's balance sheet that either add reserves or subtract reserves. And when you put it this way, adding reserves above and subtracting reserves below, what you see is that when the balance sheet entries are adding reserves, then all of the rates are pushed up against the interest on reserve balances. And when the balance sheet is draining reserves, then all of the interest rates get tugged down towards the SOFR or the tri-party repo rates. So it's either there's a little bit of a corridor here, and things are either pushed towards the top or towards the bottom, and what pushes them is the arrangement of the balance sheet entries. So I'm not here to tell that whole story. I'm here to say something about how student parted happens. And I think many of us would recognize that what I was just talking about in that picture was a dealer model. This is the one that I came up with. I'm not completely happy with it. I think that the picture itself is quite attractive, in my opinion. But I've been thinking about, I mentioned yesterday, and Perry mentioned earlier today, that I have been trying to figure out the overnight rates complex. And I think we are perhaps steered, when you see Trainer's dealer model, you recognize how market making works, and it's very compelling, and he's really sees quite deeply into what is going on there. I think there's building on that, maybe we have a tendency to try to make the actual overnight rates simpler than they are. And so now I would say it seems like there's an overnight rates complex, not just one short-term rate, and the relationships between them change faster than maybe we would like to faster than is comfortable, right? And that was my question to Zoltan yesterday. So I think the dealer model is not wrong. I think it's right and very helpful, but the institutions within it are complicated, and some of those patterns change too quickly for writing, so that by the time we have a story figured out, it has changed. I think that's maybe the problem that Zoltan has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I show you this because it leads to a question which I wonder if we could work on. It's my third provocation here, which is that obviously I love the Trainer model and I teach it and I work with it, and I have a way to do it on the newsletter. But I wonder if we could collectively work on this a little bit, because the thing is, think about what Zoltan was saying yesterday. There's kind of a series of backstops. It's not just one outside spread. There are more inner and more outer spreads, in fact, in a hierarchically, a tiered hierarchical arrangement of different markets, and making Trainer's picture work for that kind of story, which is pretty common. I think, Michael, this is maybe some of what we're seeing in Chinese repo markets, for example. The conceptual picture that we have, Trainer's diagram from that paper, is hard to adapt to a set of related markets. And so I'm thinking of Perry's FX swap line paper too. I've never seen that many Trainer diagrams on one page. It was really nice. But I wonder if we might if this is maybe worth some investigation. Is there another way? Could there be other ways to represent market making? Not inconsistent with Trainer's idea, but just different pictures, different mappings onto the page, but that might add to what Trainer gave us, the feature that we could more easily connect a couple of markets and show how market making spills over from one into the other. That's what you can do with T accounts, which show balance sheet flows. And if you have three and then you realize you need a fourth or a fifth, you can just tack them onto the end and continue your story. It gets complicated eventually, but it's a manageable kind of complexity. I wonder if we could build on the thinking apparatus for market making in a way that gives us some of those benefits, to let us think faster and to give us more of a Lego set or something where we can put these ideas together one way and then take them apart and put them together another way. I think that might be helpful, especially for our internal conversations within this community, as we try to puzzle things out in an environment of change. So that's my third provocation. I wonder if there's other representations Could we spend a little time taking Trainer apart and putting it back together in a different way, so that maybe we could talk about market making in a more flexible and more comprehensive way? And all of these provocations, I'm here to help. I have a certain amount of time, and I can listen. I'm pretty busy, and I love Student Parted, and I would love this my conversation to be part of all of these, and I will lend my time as best I can. But we have a whole community here, and I thought some suggestions that might be the work of others would not go wrong in this conversation. The last thing, and maybe and I guess this is by way of closing. Let me see what time it is, so we still have a few minutes for questions. I have been motivated to, you can't think only about money. Even in a blog about money, there needs to be space for other things. So I have over the last year, tried to find a couple of just ways to write about something else here and there. That has been a couple of film reviews in the last couple months. Nobody has complained. So I guess that is okay. Repo Man has, I struggled to find the connection to finance, but it does come up. It does come up when you're talking to people. You mentioned that you study repo, and then they mentioned Repo Man, and I thought it might be nice to have something to say in that kind of conversation. And it turns out it is really a movie about collateral. So I tried to say that in a few hundred words. The Hummingbird project is actually about high-speed finance. It's about fiber optic and the speed of light, and the lives and emotional narratives that go along with that, with an effort to build a high-speed cable. Not a true story, but it might as well be a true story. It's describing things that do really happen, and those are useful for teaching, because you can't. Sometimes your students need to do something else, and so tell them to watch the Hummingbird Project, which is a big budget Hollywood movie with stars in it. It's fun to watch. It's easy to watch, and then you can have a conversation about high speed finance. So it does have some instrumentality, utility in our professional lives, but also just a little bit of a break from balance sheets and so on. That is the end of my remarks. I will leave these provocations up here because you can read my newsletter, and so I've had a lot of opportunity to tell people what I think about the ideas, but it's really important to me that this community continue to exist. YSI has for quite some time now been something very different in the economics community, focused on graduate students, but obviously not only graduate students. It's really important that a space that's really based on mutual respect and collaboration. There's not really a territoriality. People. I don't think people here feel like they own a certain thing and nobody else can come there. Not every space is like this, as I'm sure you know. And so it's been valuable to me to be part of these conversations. I hope that I am bringing something of value to you. I offer these suggestions. We'll have to work together to see what version these might actually take, or whether people want to go another direction. I'm here you can see what I'm doing. I'm doing it in public, and I will keep doing it, and as best I can pursue these questions that I put out there. But I would love to do it alongside other people. I think that's what makes this interesting. So thank you for your time and for reading Student Parted. And I think we have a few minutes for questions. I see Anush, you raised your hand. I would love to hear from you.
Hey Dan, I can go first. I'm breathless. That's so much activity. A trader will be an expert in European bonds and know nothing about the US bond market. Because when you're operating at that level of granularity, it's really very granular. It's very, very specific, but you've spread yourself over so many different markets, and I can see why you definitely need a team. You need a whole team because this is a huge undertaking that you've done. And outside spread person, if you take my point, and this is and so I just admire people who can operate at that level, and again with the breadth. So I mean, but you definitely need a team. We collectively don't want you to get burnt out. So I would offer myself if I were any use, but that's not the level of abstraction. One comment. I don't know if we want to sort of take this up now or pause it for the crypto conversation. But one thing that I'll just flag it now, and then we can, since we're out of time and crypto is going to come up again and again. I noticed you use the phrase banking without liabilities to discuss tokenized stuff. It strikes me that there's a fundamental ontological distinction between what cryptocurrencies are and what credit money is. And the way I approach it, which is I think maps onto what you're saying, is that tokens are different from promises. Tokens are things, tokens are items, even if they're digital items. They're not promises to pay anything. They are just have artificial, algorithmically contrived scarcity value. And so you captured this by saying banking without liabilities. It's just the asset. So another way of saying that is it's a thing, right? And so it's not a promise. Whereas credit is a promise. Tokenization is like securitization. It's just a method for putting things onto a chain. Now, in principle, you can put a stream of cash flow onto a chain. You can tokenize a liability. But it's and then it's a method of distributing it in a certain way. But the blockchain itself or Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, not crypto assets, but cryptocurrencies are sort of hostile to credit. And they're simultaneously hostile for that very reason, to hierarchy, right? They don't want the ability of any institution to create and destroy any instrument that can function as means of payment, right? So they want to thingify credits. And that's why it fails, because credit is extremely useful. It's extremely useful. And in fact, it's both distributed and centralized simultaneously, right? It's hierarchical. And that's the kind of genius of credit. And we have to figure out how to manage it, of course. And it depends on who we is. But this apparatus, this hierarchical apparatus, which is simultaneously flexible and stable, centralized and distributed, et cetera, et cetera. Humanity has spent a lot of time fumbling its way through kind of coming up with this technology. And so it has a degree of Darwinian fitness. And so I very much take up, I think one conversation that we should definitely have is with the computer scientists, because they are reinventing institutional economics from the ground up. But they don't have the sensibilities, the sort of the banking school sensibilities that we've learned from Perry. And so I think that's a very useful arbitrage to have, because they are, in a sense, they have their own conceits, of course, they just as economists do, but they have a kind of engineering pragmatism that I think goes well with the kind of American pragmatism in which the institutionalist school is sort of affiliated with, and the banking school is affiliated with. And so I think they will be, in principle, open to that conversation, precisely because they want to do things, they want to build things. They are, to use David Collins' phrase, hunting dogs, not show dogs, right? And I think that is a super interesting conversation that we need to find a common vocabulary to do that. And I think one way is to begin with this distinction between things and promises. But let me leave it there. But just, yeah, I hope you get some help.
Yeah, thank you, Anush. Let me say quickly, the breadth comes at a cost, and I try to follow everything, but it's hard to keep up, and there are details that I can't follow. So I'm trying to do it, but it's not one person's work, Strongly agree with what you're saying about the computer science conversation. That's exactly I'm in exactly the same place there. And just in terms of writing fast and writing slow, I just think I think we need all of that, you know, and I would like to have a multifaceted conversation, and I have one piece of that which I like doing, but I would like it to be connected to other things moving more slowly and taking in taking a little bit more time, more outer spreads, as you might say. I want to continue this, but I also want to leave.
Can I ask my question?
Am I moderating? So maybe I see is that Larissa? Hi, Larissa. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Hey, first, thank you so much, Dan. I love Soon Parted. I've distributed it widely throughout my organization. I've had it shared back to me. It's like, oh, hey, check this out, which is also like really, really nice. So I have one quick comment to add to engaging with computer scientists. I think it can also be interesting to engage with people with a more legal background, because it seems that they're not just trying to build new technologies, but new forms of governance. And I think that that's also, there are some interesting connectivities with the money view, but then it's also, we already have spoken about this, that the political lens is also important. So that I think is what, you know, creates in my mind some different possibilities of how this could play out. But then my very quick question, what have been some of the surprises in the responses that you've received?
Thank you for that. I agree. Yeah, I agree. That sounds like the right idea. You're mentioning governance. I hadn't actually thought so much about. I'm aware of that, but I hadn't thought that much about governance. But it is a good point. What I had thought about more was a question of some of the legalities. You know, which, for example, we here might quickly write Bitcoin down as a liability for some imaginary blockchain entity, which might be fine for us. We could see how that works, but whose promise is it? It's not a legal entity's promise. So a legal person would look at that and say, but that's not right. So now you're adding to that another layer of sort of political economic concern, which is about governance. And they have talked a lot about that. And so, yeah, we might pull that. We might pull that in. That's a good suggestion. Surprises. I've been surprised, I think, I didn't really know who the audience would be. I guess I figured that the Money View Symposium people would be there. And when I started putting T accounts in my very first posts, I guess I was implicitly saying, you know, hey, you are my people, you need to read this. But I've been surprised at the other people who've been there, you know, and couldn't characterize it along one single, there's not one way to characterize it, you know, but there's a lot of people who seem to be there for crypto. There's a lot of people who seem to be there for, you know, I have a fair number, you know, I get to see the email addresses when they sign up. So there's a lot of people in, you know, different, I have 3 or 4 or 5 central banks represented. There's a certain, I'll protect their anonymity, but there's a certain securities regulatory body where I have a surprisingly high number of, you know, and Oliver Wyman, as you say, Larry. So like, I know that and so it's been a kind of a pleasant surprise to know that there must be offices where 3 or 4 or 5 people are getting my emails when they come out, and they're probably talking about them. And sometimes they say something back to me, as you do, Larissa, but other times I don't hear anything. But I know that they're not unsubscribing, and I know that there's a bunch of them all getting them, so they're probably talking about it. And that's just, I guess that it was just a surprise to sort of watch that play out and to get very small indications of what that is like for them, without my really being there personally to make the conversation happen. So that's what I'll say for now. I suppose there have been other surprises, which maybe I'll find another time to mention. But thank you for the question, and thank you for reading.
Yeah, I think we're coming to the time to break, and I just wanted to say, Dan, we're all very proud of you, and we're very impressed. As I want to say, second Anusha's point. I think the fact that this is something you're doing on the side, we can understand that Zoltan is putting this out twice a week, but you and the breadth you're covering, it's really great to see. I would like to sort of continue this conversation in terms of.
Jay, can I say?
Go ahead.
Can I
please.
just say one last thing? So I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jay, but I want to say one last thing in response to Asker's question in the comment, which is very broad and might be. He's asking something which is probably relevant and which I would like recorded. Asker's asking, when I'm asking for help from the community, am I asking for guest posts or encouraging others to start blogging also? I mean, I guess at the moment, what I'm just saying is I'm doing this in one place in a certain format, but I draw on work that comes from other places and I try to contribute back to that work. So I guess really I'm just saying it could be working groups, it could be academic papers, in whatever space you might be in, you know, let's find places to advance some of these questions and then come back here and talk about them. I'm open to using Soon Parted for lots of purposes. At the moment, I'm just trying to get people thinking about things. There are graduate students here, you know, I write something in 600 words, but there might be 40 pages to be written on those same ideas. And I can't do all of that, but maybe together we can find things that would be useful for others. And I'm identifying a couple points where I'm pretty sure we'll get results if we look, you know, and there's something a couple posts that I can write about it, but for the community as a whole, having a substantive conversation with computer scientists, I was glad to hear that, you know, Anush seconded that impulse, but having that built up would bring benefits for a lot of us. There's many conversations and many papers and even books to be written on that subject. Who else is going to do it but us? So I'm trying to say, let's find lots of ways that this can look and build them together.
Well, Dan, you said exactly what I was about to say, so that's very good close.